Right now, I'm here talking to Brearley, who is one of the next-gen athletes at Snowboard Canada. It's interesting to think about some of the work that he's getting into and some of the roles he's preparing himself for, which is why I wanted to interview him. I really was interested about hearing a professional athlete, how that career might be somewhat related to, say, someone who is preparing to be in the future of business. I'm gonna leave it up to him to introduce himself.
Hey, I'm Liam Brearley. I'm a next-gen athlete with Canada Snowboard, and I train year-round for competitive slopestyle snowboarding.
All right, cool. So the first thing I really wanted to hear about was do you want to tell us what that really means to be a next-gen athlete? What are some of the things that you get up to in your day-to-day life, I guess?
So being a next-gen athlete, you meet a lot of new people. You travel a lot and train with your team while missing quite a bit of school. So there's some challenges to it for sure.
So how'd you get started with snowboarding in general, and then Canada snowboard specifically?
So I've started skiing from a very young age. My parents started me skiing since I was like 3. And then I always wanted to try snowboarding, so my grandparents bought me a snowboard for my 7th birthday. And I loved it so much, I wanted to do it all the time. Ended up joining my local team called Simple Snowboarding at the time, and moved through local competitions to provincial competitions to national competitions, and made it to the next gen team the start of last season.
Okay. That's really interesting to hear, because it seems like you've been doing this since a really young age. I know a bunch of teenagers right now. A big challenge is trying to figure out hey, what do I really want to do in life, and figure out what that passion looks like. And if you can figure it out, to say snowboarding was your passion, then often it's what are the steps that I need to do to achieve this? How can I go out of my way to get to the next level? What made you want to go from I guess the smaller organizations you worked with to, say, a provincial level, and then so on, keep climbing the ladder, I guess?
Well, I've always been really competitive my whole life. Anything I do, I'm competitive with, and I wanted to progress in snowboarding just because I loved it so much, and when those opportunities came, I gladly took them.
Yeah, I'm sure it's like that. Here at the Knowledge Society, one of the things that we're always doing is thinking about what motivates people to do certain things, because often, whether you're training for whether you're training to be the next professional Olympian, or say the next big business leader, one of the starting points is hey, I want to be motivated to achieve these higher goals. Do you think there were any specific things that kept you going in the face of challenges, and let you keep being committed to this?
Well, the snowboarding community is actually a really welcoming and nice community. You know, we're all best friends, so it's not like everyone's trying to compete with each other, and only that. We have fun all the time, and we always want to progress together, and it makes it really enjoyable for everyone.
Yeah. Do you want to give a specific example? Maybe any specific people that you met along the way?
People I've met, William Buffy is actually from Toronto. I grew up riding with him here at Mount St. Louis in Oro-Medonte, and we both moved to the next gen team together and started traveling internationally together as well. And having a friend that you've trained with since the beginning really helps in those new situations and places far from home.
Yeah, I'd actually love to hear about that because doing a bit of research, I heard that you've been traveling to like international competitions. I think I saw Sweden and New Zealand in there.
Yeah, so I went to New Zealand for Junior Worlds August of 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the year after that, the season after that, that I got onto the next gen team. So I started training with them for a little bit. And I went to my first World Cup in Italy in January of this year.
Okay.
And then also attended a World Cup in Mammoth, California. And ending last season off going to Sweden for Junior Worlds again.
Wow. Any like best trip highlights or memorable moments? I guess especially since I don't know, most 16-year-olds wouldn't be traveling around the world, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely cool. I think Italy was probably the coolest place I've been yet.
How so?
It was really scenic, and I just like being in a different continent. I thought Europe was like the coolest because it's so much more different from our culture and day-to-day life.
Yeah. It's really interesting to think about how working towards these goals kind of expands your perspectives by showing you all of these new challenges, like not only to help you yourself grow personally, but also with the way you see the world. Like just realize, hey, it's so much bigger than what I thought it was.
Yeah, it's very humbling to be able to have these opportunities and travel this much.
Mm-hmm. And on the flip side of that, I guess I also wanted to talk to you about some of the challenges involved, because right now it seems like, hey, it's all like glamorous, I get to go travel around the world, but I'm sure like if an average high school kid was to ask you, well, why can't I do this? You'd be able to tell them, well, there's so much more going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge would be financial.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot of money to train every year and go on all these trips. So I've been doing like a bottle drive around my community.
Mm-hmm.
And collecting cans and bottles, which are only worth 10 to 20 cents each, but every little bit helps. And having a one-income family is also a very large challenge financially as well.
Yeah, it's really insane to think about like the rising cost of sports. I've heard so much about how this is like such a big problem for so many families, and it's crazy to think about, say, how many potential like master snowboarders might be out there, but they just didn't have that opportunity because of those like financial limitations in our current environment.
Yeah, and I know many other people like that as well. It's a large challenge in any sport, really.
Yeah. And like, how'd you get the idea of, say, bottle drives? Like, I would never have thought of that.
So, I know a few people have done it in the past, and I decided spring 2 years ago, I think, or a year and a half ago, that I would go collect some bottles and cans from cottages because I knew I could make a little bit of money that way.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, it escalated into having a bin in my driveway, and people will always come drop off cans and bottles to donate to my travel and everything like that.
Well, I guess like that community support must be really humbling to have in terms of all of the people that come out to support you in that like goal.
Yeah, I live in a small community, but the better thing about being in a small community is that you get to know almost everyone that you live around, and they all want to support you in what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. And do you see yourself continuing this like in the future, like trying to, I guess specifically with the recycling drives, trying to meet those financial ends and continue your path in sports based on this?
Yeah, I think I will continue it for a while at least, because it has been helping me very much at this point. And as long as the people in my community continue to support me, I will keep doing it for as long as I possibly can.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Like recently, I was at Elevate, which is this tech festival in Toronto, and just randomly, I happened to run into Sam Effa of Athletics Canada, and he's an Olympian who kind of talked about some of his challenges, like with keeping up with sports, because especially like when he was going to the next level, the biggest barrier for him was this sudden injury. And I think one of his biggest takeaways for me was like, no matter what your barriers, whether they be financial, whether you run across an injury, like in the end, the people who are able to persevere through that, that's the biggest metric for success.
Yeah, I think so. Like he said, no matter what the challenge is, if you are able to find a way to push through that and persevere through those challenges, that's how you know that you love that sport and you should pursue that.
And I guess it works the other way as well. Like if you love what you're doing, then like it just makes it all the easier to keep going through difficulty. So maybe you just need to keep trying things until that right passion comes about.
Yeah, for sure. If you really love it, you will find a way to continue doing it.
Yeah. And like one of the things that is a bit interesting to think about, for me at least, is like you are only 16 right now, right?
Correct.
So say for the average 16-year-old like who might be listening on to this later, how do you think your life right now, day to day, is different from that average teenager? And what did it take to get you there?
I think my life's different in a lot of ways. The first I thought of would be the traveling, and with that becomes a lot more catching up on schoolwork and things like parties that go on I can't go to because I need to be training or I need to be catching up on school or I'm not there.
I can definitely relate to that myself. I think that just goes to show the connections between, say, preparing to be at the higher level of anything. Just like for me, the average day to day, even that, like as you mentioned, it's a lot of catching up with school, managing the extra priorities on top of things, and then even like at the very basic details, like I don't have time for Instagram, I don't have time for parties, as you mentioned. So it's definitely really bizarre, I guess, in a way, because you can see that normal looks so different. But it's also like interesting to see that, for me at least, I don't really miss that regular lifestyle because of the way that I'm focused on my goal. Do you think you have like any regrets for yourself, or are you happy with the way you're committing to things?
No, I definitely don't have any regrets. I love to travel and I love to do what I do, and that's different than a lot of people, and that seems weird to them. But going back to what would be a normal lifestyle would be weird for me as well.
I think one thing that perfectly sums it up is this quote by Ray Dalio. He's a billionaire who's working on like the most intensive banking you could ever imagine. One of his interesting thoughts on this was like, once you start once you start training to be at the higher level of anything, once you start developing habits that prepare you to go beyond normal at a specific skill, then you can't really go back. Like, you never miss that old lifestyle. And I really agree with that myself.
Yeah, I do as well.
So I guess another thing that kind of ties into that is the question of motivation. I know we talked about it a little bit before, but I'd be curious to hear. You talked about how snowboarding was a passion for you in your youth. You talked about some of the interesting experiences that come about that allow you to get over it. But when it comes to, say, persevering through a challenge, are there any specific strategies that you use, any specific things that keep you going?
Well, in terms of tricks, like progressing through learning different things to be able to keep up with the competition, it just takes a lot of perseverance. And my coaches helped me so much with that.
Mm-hmm.
But to tweak every little thing that is wrong or get a trick more consistent, it just takes practice. But if you love doing it, that practice just feels like fun more than like working hard or practice.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to think about it. Like, you definitely have to put in the effort, but if you're able to, I guess, make the effort seem like fun, make it seem effortless, I guess, it's an easy way to go about it.
Yeah, definitely.
And that even reminds me of like ancient knowledge, like philosophy. I believe it was the Taoists that kind of mentioned the best action is like the action that feels like it's actionless. I guess it's archaic in our language now, but I can see those ideas still.
Yeah, that was definitely apply.
And I guess one thing that kind of makes it harder to always relate to all these people doing different things. Like, you only ever see the end results. Like, you only see, hey, Liam went over to New Zealand and he was like competing at this world competition, but you don't see kind of the effort that goes on behind the scenes, like all the hours of practice that you mentioned. Have you heard of the analogy, like, where it's like success is an iceberg? You only see the results, but you don't see all the stuff that went on into making it, I guess, if an iceberg were below the water.
Yeah, I think I have heard that before, and I think it's very true. People only see a portion or like the end results of what you do, when the practice and the progression and the behind the scenes stuff is so much more of the picture.
Mm-hmm. And I guess to extend upon that, with you kind of described like all of the aspects of the work you have to put on behind the scenes, but in terms of what you see like success being like, could you talk about some of your goals within, say, the next 3 months or the next few years?
Yeah, within the next 3 months, we'll be competing a lot. So mainly I just want to progress as much as I possibly can, learn everything I can, get all my tricks like super consistent, so I'm able to compete everywhere at my highest level.
Mm-hmm.
And also keep up on school as much as possible. Yeah, and then for the next few years, I want to keep snowboarding as much as I possibly can and move to that higher level of competition, or at least start to be like invited to these events like Do Tour and US Open and X Games and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And are there like any strategies that you use to keep in touch with these goals, like prioritize, say, short-term ones or longer-term ones? For myself, like, say, over here in the business world, I'm working on a recommendation for a company on, like, say, how they can reduce profits, not reduce, reduce costs. One of the specific things I'd always be doing would be, say, even down to the nitty-gritty details, like keeping tasks in order, making sure I'm reflecting on what's going well, what's not, planning out, hey, what are my outcomes for each day, and like moving forward based on that. Are there any, like, down to the minutiae details that kind of help you keep yourself on track and keep yourself accountable for all these goals?
Yeah, like you said, the little things, like having small goals, or goals like I'm gonna get this by the end of the day, or even just like mental stuff too, like I want to get less nervous before a competition, or be more mentally prepared for the pressure of competition and things like that. It really helps to have those little goals because they all add up to the end result.
And I'm really glad you mentioned the nervousness there, because I know, say, doesn't matter if you're at the biggest competition around the world, or you're pitching to one of the biggest companies like in the world, like it's the same kind of nervousness. Is there something that do you have you had an issue with that in the past? And two, have you used like any specific tips or tricks to get around that?
I have had some issues with nervousness, but competitions, being experienced, I think is a big part of it. I don't get too nervous anymore, and I think that's really helpful in my riding and my attitude towards competitions in general. And I think some of like the things that would help me are focusing on the things that you already know. So, for example, if you're at a very big competition, like you know and love snowboarding and you know your coaches, so instead of paying attention to all this new and overwhelming stuff, you can pay attention to the things that you know, and I find it helps to be less nervous.
And when you say like the experience helps, could you clarify? Did you mean, say, the experience of going to multiple events, knowing, hey, this is what happens every time, I've been through this, I can deal with it? Or did you more so mean experience as in knowing, hey, I have these skills in my portfolio and I know that I can use them, I'm confident with these skills, which kind of helps me get around those nerves?
I think it's a bit of both. Being to these events, they're all pretty similar. So you have that mentality of like, it's just another competition, like it's very similar to the last one or almost the same, so you know what's going to happen. And it's also having those tricks that like you have and you can do on this course, and I think they both help very much.
And I guess relating to that, one of the final things that I wanted to touch upon was how you mentioned those long-term goals. So right now, even thinking, say, 3 years down the line, now then you'd be, say, entering university, for instance, like it still wouldn't be where you'd be entering your professional career. So say by the time that you are doing that, say by the time you're 25, do you have any visions of success? Like, this is the outcome that I see for myself that I want to get to.
Yeah, I have a few. Like I said before, I want to be, recognized as a professional athlete, and I want to be competing regularly with the people that I have idolized in those bigger competitions, and just be best that I can possibly be, snowboarding and outside of that as well.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of like idols, is there any specific person that you hope to be like?
Yeah, there's a few. Like Mark McMorris, for example, is a really big slopestyle snowboarder of all time, and I look up to him because he's in Saskatchewan, actually, on a very small town, so he has a similar story, and he made a large name for himself doing like marketing campaigns and not just snowboarding. Although he's like one of the best snowboarders, he also has those other aspects that people love about him, and that's why he's so popular.
Yeah, I think it's really valuable to have those kinds of examples of where you might want to be at, and then think, well, how might I say raise the bar even higher? How might I say even exceed that person in the best scenario? And then not even just like idols, even mentors. I know you mentioned like with your coaches. I think those are really valuable people to guide you along that journey.
Yeah, they definitely are, and they help with everything, the learning of the tricks, the mental game for competition, and they will continue to support you no matter how far you go or if you don't snowboard at all, and that's what I love about it.
So to, I guess, conclude with this, one of the final thoughts that I wanted to ask you about was for, say, let's say first specifically, for the younger version of you that might be listening to this interview thinking, hey, like maybe I have a passion for sports, maybe specifically snowboarding. I want to take it to the next level. Is there any advice you would give to that younger version of yourself in how to get started?
I would tell them that if you love it, you are going to find a way to do it, and as long as you persevere through all of the hard times and all of the challenges that may come across, you will make it, like you will achieve your goals, and don't let anyone stop you in the process of doing that. Anyone or anything. Yeah,
I really like that idea of like going through, just taking that risk, knowing that hey, maybe it might not work, but if I love this, like I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
And so anyways, I think like this is basically the best points to end off on. Again, I've been talking with Liam Brearley of Canada Snowboard about some of his journey in pursuing a professional career to become like the next Olympian. It was really interesting to hear about all the ways that despite after all the success, you have to think about all the day-to-day details that go on in getting you ready for that. Like I know we talked about catching up with school so many times, and all of those small parts of life that everyone still has to manage. For me, I think it's very valuable to like hear some of those connections between people like working on different goals, whether that they be in like in business or in sports. And it's, I guess, really sobering to think, hey, at the end of the day, even these people who are amazing, that are working on like such great things, they're just regular people and they still have to deal with all those challenges. Yeah, and I wanted to thank you, Liam, for taking the time to share some of your thoughts. It was really interesting to hear your story. For now, I guess that's it. Do you have any last thoughts to end off with?
No, I don't think so, but thank you for having me and inviting me to talk with you today.